Good morning and welcome to worship at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Charlotte. Whether this is the first time you are attending or you've been attending for years or somewhere in between, you are welcome. This morning we celebrate the times that we have found ourselves in the good company of others. Dina Craik writes, "Oh, the comfort, the inexpressible comfort of feeling safe with a person. In this community, we call one another to dig deep and find the best within ourselves, to listen without waiting for our turn to speak, to witness the full humanity of another and journey with them so they don't have to go it alone. Called to be good company to one and all, we worship together. Welcome." We light this chalice, remembering and honoring our own tradition and celebrating the rich diversity of traditions among us. As we search for justice, meaning, and purpose, may we remember that justice, meaning, and purpose live first in deeply listening to one another.
This is a poem entitled In the Hospital by Chen Chen. My mother was in the hospital and everyone wanted to be my friend. But I was busy making a list: good dog, bad citizen, short skeleton, tall mocha, typical Tuesday. My mother was in the hospital and no one wanted to be her friend. Everyone wanted to be soft, cooing sympathies, very reasonable pigeons. No one had the time, and our solution to it was to buy shinier watches. We were enamored with what our wrists could declare. My mother was in the hospital and I didn't want to be her friend. Typical son, tall latte, short tail, bad plot, great Wi-Fi, and the atypical cafe. My mother was in the hospital and she didn't want to be her friend. She wanted to be the family grocery list. Low-fat yogurt, firm tofu. She didn't trust my father to be it. You always forget something, she said. Even when I do the list for you, even then.
This next reading is by Courtney Martin. Martin once found herself deeply moved after eavesdropping on two people having a late-night conversation in the restaurant of a Holiday Inn. Afterwards, she wrote this reflection. So much of our time is spent listening to other people in a doggedly goal-oriented way. Underneath our listening, we're asking ourselves, what can I pluck from what this person is saying that I can identify with? What confirms my worldview? What gives me an opportunity to offer advice or a response that will showcase my own intelligence or a chance to share an experience about my life? I don't mean to make that kind of listening sound shallow or manipulative. Ultimately, it's with great intention that we listen like that. We crave to connect. We crave to be seen. We crave to comfort. It's a very useful kind of listening. It helps us create new nodes, get things done, coalesce within communities. But there's another kind of listening, a listening that we neglect at our own peril. That it's not about getting some particular place, but simply about witnessing another human being. That kind of listening is long and open-ended. It is patient, it's curious, it's not calculating. This kind of listening operates on only one level. The words coming out, the way they hit the ear, the shaping of a story, a sadness, a yearning, a wish. The guy and the woman in that Holiday Inn close to midnight on a Monday were listening like that to one another, witness over chicken wings. And they made me think about all the people all over the country sitting in hotel bars and lingering outside of churches and snuggled on the living room couch, sitting over a steaming cup of tea, and maybe even crammed onto airplanes who listen without static or plotting. It's an overlooked kind of love, a way we stay sane. It happens in the cracks, under the radar, just between two people, and it doesn't happen enough. Today we're delighted to have guest musicians, Dave Matt Menoff and Liz Blygan, along with our longtime member, Peter Moore.
This world had grown confusing. His vision had gone dim. He was starting to forget the very things that made him him. In the shadow of the bridge span, he is not quite what he seems. Now the colors, shapes, and lines are sharp and vivid in his dreams. John says he is a painter, once famous for his art. John says he is a painter, though he's only painting deep within his heart. John says he is a painter. deep within his heart. Within his heart.
The words we heard earlier from Courtney Martin make me think about the lessons I was learning 6 summers ago that I'm still learning now. As Martin says, there is another kind of listening, a listening that we neglect at our own peril. It's not about getting some particular place, but simply about witnessing another human being. 6 summers back, I was in the midst of my clinical pastoral education at a public hospital in New York City. Clinical pastoral education is the portion of ministry formation spent as a chaplain in training. The idea is that you learn in a very trial by fire kind of way how to be with people in their times of crisis. I gathered every morning in a small room on the ground floor of the hospital with 8 other fledgling faith leaders. We reviewed the mistakes we had made the day before and reflected on what had gone well. Each of us was assigned different care units within the hospital, and after our morning gathering, we set off to do our rounds, visiting as many patients as we could. One of my assigned areas was the psychiatric care unit, a closed floor. Even though I was still a few years away from completing my ministry education and training, patients and hospital staff simply saw me as a chaplain. I wanted so much to be seen as an expert, as a calm, certain leader, granting wisdom and healing everywhere I went. And I was determined to help the poor souls on that psychiatric floor. One of the first patients I met was a woman I'll call Stephanie. Stephanie had been admitted a few days ago. She was rail thin and was still wearing remnants of heavy eye makeup. I met her in the small room she shared with another patient. Stephanie had decorated the very white walls with drawings she had done in crayon and then taped around the room. Stephanie talked about an abusive boyfriend and a life spent in and out of homelessness. She casually mentioned supernatural characters who were searching for her, demons, creatures who meant her harm. At one point, she paused and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Then after she made her assessment, she said, "Can I see a real chaplain?" I tried so hard showing her my ID badge and explaining that I was the chaplain assigned to her floor, my air of confidence and calm melting away. Stephanie seemed very disappointed. So finally defeated, I asked her to use the crayons nearby and draw a picture of what a real chaplain was. And she brightened, and taking her crayons, she drew a picture of a man wearing black robes and a large cross. And I understood and went to go find the Catholic priest, who was a very patient and wonderful man who came through for me a number of times. To my surprise, when I came in the next day, there was a note in the chaplain's room saying that Stephanie had requested to see me again. I ended up visiting Stephanie often. I began to understand that the priest could speak to angels on her behalf and provide momentary protection from demons. I couldn't, but somehow she wanted to see me too. It took all summer, but I slowly realized that Stephanie was inviting me not as a guide, but as a companion on her long journey. She was living in a reality different from the one I knew, but real nonetheless. And she was scared. She was seeking company, someone to hold her hand and believe what she was saying and experiencing. Stephanie taught me another way of listening. Not waiting for a pause so I could teach her something or give her advice or share my wisdom. Stephanie taught me the kind of listening that is not about getting some particular place, but simply about witnessing another human being. In class with the other chaplains in training, we studied sacred texts and did theological reflection, reflecting on suffering and the work we were doing. And I still have the thick binder of readings and resources that we used. I still sometimes read through the long PowerPoint presentations and articles. 7 approaches to theological reflection summarized. The cognitive component of piety, the insightfulness and knowledge that runs out of and shapes the attitudes and dispositions of the self and its apprehensions of God and the world in relation to God, that kind of simple academic stuff. And I still love studying theology as much as I did then, and I find it helps me reflect in a meaningful way on the messiness of life. But I started that summer of chaplaincy thinking it was my job to bring advanced theological understanding to share with each patient. I imagined casually walking into a room and sharing some profound, earth-shattering theological insight or spiritual practice that would heal them almost instantly. Well, down the hall from Stephanie was a man named Seymour. And Seymour suffered hallucinations and paranoia if he went off his medication. But like many people I know, he was frustrated by having to take that medication, and he wanted there to be a natural way to have orderly and safe thoughts. Seymour wrote for hours every morning on the legal pads the medical staff provided him with. And one day I took note of the stacks of papers next to Seymour's bed and said, "Oh, you must love to write." He said, "Not exactly." Seymour said he had a hunch that he could overcome what he called his bad habits with discipline. Thus, he was determined to write 20 pages by hand every morning in hopes that his mind would stay clear the rest of the day. I asked Seymour once if he would share some of his writing with me. Instead of reading off the page, he looked at me directly and recited for 30 minutes straight. There were so many poetic and profound phrases that I recorded as best I could in my journal. Later, I Googled a phrase and realized that Seymour knew by heart the entire sermon preached in London at the funeral of King Edward VII in 1910. And that was just one of the many texts that Seymour knew by heart and could recite to me without hesitation, treating me to the daily inspiring lectures I had once thought I'd be giving him. As it turned out, Seymour was not a naive pupil waiting to be instructed in the area of theology or spiritual practice. He had absorbed an abundance of beautiful words. He stuck to his spiritual discipline with deep commitment, and he lived in a radiant and complex, dangerous and lovely theological world all his own. Again, I learned that my role was to listen in a way that was long and open-ended, patient and curious. The words coming out, the way they hit the ear, the shaping of a story, a sadness, a yearning, a wish. The third time I tried to learn this lesson that summer, about what my role was and was not, was from a patient recovering in the intensive care unit. One day I walked into this woman's room and found that she had tried to end her own life a few days earlier. She was lying in bed while her husband sat in a chair reading the newspaper aloud. When I asked if she'd like a visit from a chaplain, she said yes. Her husband stood up and kissed her forehead and mumbled that maybe we'd want some privacy and left the room. The woman began to tell me the story of the past 48 hours and how she came to be lying in that hospital bed. I listened with increasing discomfort. Her anguish was so raw, so exposed. I felt more and more panicky, wondering how to make this situation better for her. As a chaplain, as an expert, how could I fix it? How could I lead her away from her own pain into the realm of pleasant conversation and more trivial matters? When at last she paused and looked at me for a response, I hurriedly said, "It's okay, it'll be okay." She responded with anger and grief. "No, it's not okay. It's not okay. My husband thinks I don't love him, my stepdaughter is scared, and I don't want to live anymore. It's not okay." Then she asked if she could take my arm so we could walk up and down the hallway in silence, saying she wanted to be alone but not alone. So we walked in silence until she was tired and got back in bed. Of course, it was never my job to lead this woman away from her pain. Instead, I kept her company as she led me down the hallway and up again, searching for her own resilience. As the poet Chen Chen put it, when you're in the hospital, no one wants to be your friend. Everyone wants to be soft, cooing sympathies, very reasonable pigeons. No one has the time, and our solution is to buy shinier watches. This woman did not need a chaplain to distract her with pleasantries or to lead her away from her pain. She needed someone to listen without static or plotting. 6 summers ago, I walked into a hospital thinking that as a chaplain, my job was to know and to lead and to fix. By the time the summer ended, I realized my role was to enter every patient's room with beginner's mind, to show up as an empty cup and listen, to participate in that overlooked kind of love, that is being present enough to witness another human being. I understood that I was more a companion than a guide. By the end of that summer, I had learned a little bit more about savoring the good company of another and being good company in return. Blessed be, Amen.
Welcome to today's service. We're honored to have guests with us. Our members would like to greet you following the service, and so that we may do so, if you're visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, please take note of the guests seated near you. After the service, invite them to join you for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience for future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card and place your completed card in an offering basket when they are passed later in the service. Members with a lifetime event to share can do so on the reverse side of the card. You'll find them along with the offering envelopes on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them down your row now. Some returning visitors may be interested in hearing about how to become a member. If so, talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. How can this be possible? Help me understand how you wrap your head around this. Oh, no. You can't just pick one thing you agree with and throw away the others. Voting for him means you voted against me. These were the words that I said to my mother in November of 2016. Arguments and exchanges like this continued for many months until we both came to the realization that we couldn't discuss politics. Now we barely discuss anything at all. Prior to the election, contentious conversations like this between me and my family were not uncommon and increased over time as our viewpoints became further and further apart. My emotional reaction came from my expert mind, confident, opinionated, and sure that the only way through this was for them to change. Trying to teach and move them to a different place. Never pausing just to feel, but just barging straight right ahead and fixing everything. Pausing to examine where my reaction was coming from and working on me instead of them. Never really thinking and asking myself, what is that? What has that inspired in me? What has that called forth in me? Afforded the opportunities to relocate and choose the work that I wanted to do while moving further away from my inherited identity. Forming new relationships, growing, learning, absorbing, trying to connect, trying to show my intelligence and worth, yet constantly fearful that someone would see who I was and where I came from. From a family that was uneducated, racist, living in a place that no one would choose to live, and struggling every day to stay on top. Failing to understand that there had to be someone on the bottom in order for them to be on top, and never escaping their inherited identity. I spent a lot of time building barriers around my shame, always trying to be what I thought I was supposed to be rather than embracing who I was. Acknowledging that I came from this family and this place, and it makes me who I am. So much time, in fact, that I forgot that my family is still in that same place and continues to stay in that place while I have lost my empathy to understand and let it be. I now exhibit the same bias that has made me so angry in others, never pausing in an effort to understand a place that they are in. The space between stimulus and response is one of mindfulness, bigness, flexibility, and a place to allow others to be who they are. This space is love and compassion. Leaving the expert mind behind and approaching the situation with a beginner's mind, wide open, listening, humble, learning to see my biases, stepping back, being vulnerable, and practicing awareness. In his book, Peace is Every Step, Thich Nhat Hanh describes meditating on compassion. The essence of love and compassion is understanding, the ability to recognize the physical, material, and psychological suffering of others, to put ourselves inside the skin of the other. We go inside the body, feelings and mental formations, and witness for ourselves their suffering. Shallow observation as an outsider is not enough to see their suffering. We must become one with the object of our observation. When we are in contact with one another's suffering, a feeling of compassion is born in us. Compassion means, literally, to suffer with.
Again, welcome. If you would like to learn more about us, you can read through the back of your order of service. You can explore our website, or you can subscribe to our weekly e-newsletter, Currents. call your attention to just a few items. Today, after the service in Freeman Hall, we have the final event in our Sunday Fun Day series. We're going to play a rather silly trivia type game that we hope will help me and you continue to get to know each other better, and for you all to have an opportunity to get to know one another more. We're offering engaging programming all summer long. One session is called "Why Can't You See It From My Perspective? The Evolution of Complex Thought." Another is called "The Tree of Life, Creating a Community Forest Art Project." You can sign up for these sessions and more at the adult programming table in Freeman Hall. We turn our thoughts now to the human community. The people all over the world who drink water every day that isn't safe, that breathe air thick with pollutants that make them sick. We think of the people everywhere who put their bodies on the line to protest corruption, greed, cruelty, oppression. We think of people closer to home, people in our own country, our own state, our own city, all the people sorting through the experiences of the past week, people who are worried or sad, lonely or angry, people who discovered new joy, felt hopeful, filled with gratitude. And here within our own congregation, we give thanks for the people sitting around us and the people who couldn't be here this morning. We're sending love and prayers to Josh Surratt and to his grandfather who is ill. We're sending love to John Karras in his time of illness. We are celebrating with Danielle and Jeremy Maddox the birth of their child, Kennedy Claire. Whatever joys or sorrows you carry with you this morning, may you feel the love of this community. And would you be with me now in a time of meditation and aspiration? Taking a moment to feel the bottoms of your feet and the palms of your hands, to feel the air coming in and out of your lungs, and to listen to these words by Jacob Trapp. If it is language that makes us human, one half of language is to listen. Silence can exist without speech, but speech cannot live without silence. Listen to the speech of others. Listen even more to their silence. To pray is to listen to the revelations of nature, to the meaning of events. To listen to music is to listen also to silence and to find both deepened and enriched.
to a new world. By the glory of her smile, said we were glorious once, and we're glorious still. If we take the time to look, we can see that glory well. See that man there on the corner, rags wrapped around his feet, a shopping cart to hold his life in. He's out begging on the street, turn the clock back 60 years. Who's that laughing little boy? Playing with his sister. His mother's pride and joy. We were glorious once, we're still, and we're glorious still. If we take the time to look, if we take the time to look, we can see that glory well. When we reach out to each other, or let our smile come shining through, just for a moment, feel the glory. No matter what else we've been through. We were glorious once, and we're glorious still. If we take the time to look, we can see that glory well. We were glorious once, we were glorious once, and we're glorious still. We're glorious still. If we take the time to look, we can see that glory well. See that glory well.
May these gifts, given with generosity and love, help our church and our world become a more peaceful, caring, fair, and free. We'll now take the offering. May we now rise in body and or spirit to recite our UUCC mission statement. Challenged by our liberating faith, we discover deeper spiritual meaning, nurture loving community, cultivate courageous connections, and partner in the work of justice.
May we take the love and resilience we discover in this place out with us into the world. You may be seated.